Manawa mai te muri nuku, manawa mai te Māori rangi. Ko te Māori kai au, he Māori tipua, ka pukaru mai te pō, te hei Māori ora. So nau mai hara mai everyone, welcome to the latest the last webinar rising, Rangahau Rising, our last webinar for 2025. Just a bit of housekeeping. If you want questions or points of clarification, just put them in the chat and we'll address them at the end. Also, as well as the Tukutuku app, I'd like to just say keep in touch with everything Bioprotection Aotearoa through the socials. And these are the Book of Face, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and the newly well, it's not new, it's the whole so keep in touch with those. And I've actually just forgotten the fourth one, Zoha. What's it called? And LinkedIn. Anyway, without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Laureline Rossignaud. She's one of the amazing researchers associated with Bioprotection Aotearoa. After completing her PhD in ecology at the University of Canterbury in 2021, she has now joined Bioprotection Aotearoa as a postdoctoral researcher, where she has investigated the drivers of plant invasion in Mānuka and Kānuka Shrublands across Aotearoa. She has a current role at the Bioeconomy Science Institute at Group Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research. Try saying that quickly. Without further ado, I'd like to welcome Laureline and give the floor to you. Kia ora and welcome.
Kia ora, Nick. So tēnā koutou katoa, ko Laureline Rossignaud toku ingoa, no wiwi haho, he kaiputai aho ki Bioeconomy Science Institute, Manaaki Whenua Landcare Research. No reira, tēnā koutou katoa. Thanks so much to be here today to attend this last webinar, no pressure. I'm gonna share my screen and hopefully you'll see my presentation quite easily and we can start straight away. If you can give me a thumbs up, Nick. Yeah, all good.
Good.
Perfect. I'll just put you in a corner so I can see what I'm presenting as well. And so thanks again for coming here today. I'm gonna talk about the work that I've done as a postdoctoral researcher at Bioprotection Aotearoa. This was a 2 years postdoc led by a distinguished professor, Philip Hulme. And so it's been already 2 years since I finished that postdoc. Anyway, this postdoc was mainly focusing on identifying drivers of weed invasions in native forest and shrublands with a particular interest in Kānuka Shrubland. So, first, what do we mean by weeds here? So basically weeds are non-native species that have been introduced from overseas, which means that initially they were not present in New Zealand and are not supposed to be in New Zealand if it wasn't for human activities, for instance. And so while you walk into around New Zealand, you might notice quite a few of these weeds, or sometimes they are less visible. Like for instance, here, if you walk in the forest, you might think, oh yeah, it's quite a nice forest, and the understory, there might be actually some weed species. So here you have Micellis muralis that is quite commonly found in the understory of native forest. Other weeds are actually quite well known and quite noticeable in the landscape. I'm sure you all have, if you've been to Te Kapo, you all have that pretty photos of lupins. And unfortunately, they are also weeds and are not supposed to be around New Zealand. So why should we be worried about those weeds? Because some of them are quite pretty. And actually, unfortunately, half of the New Zealand vascular plant species are non-native, which is quite a big number, one of the highest if you compare with other countries. And for quite a lot of them, we know that they have negative and widespread impact on native plant communities and their ecosystems. When focusing on our native forests, we know that they are less prone to invasions compared to open grassland. But for this postdoc, we wanted really to understand better where shrublands were sitting, because there is a little bit less studies around focusing on those ecosystems. So to understand the drivers of wood invasions, we need to know like how many are there around, and there are actually quite many that may lead to the success of an invasion. And for some of the main ones are climate suitability that is known to influence the early stage of invasion. It's almost often seen as one of the first barriers to wood invasion or establishment. The nearby source is an important aspect as well, which is also known as the propagal pressure. You have different level of disturbance that might allow and create space for weeds to establish, and also soil properties such as fertility that can also influence weed invasions, the presence of native species that can compete with the non-natives or favor their establishment, and also the life history traits of weeds, which might determine which ones might be more successful in terms of invasions. And of course, all those factors can interact with each other. For instance, this different level of disturbance might affect the soil properties. So for this research, we really focused on Kānuka Shrubland because they are the most widespread native shrublands that you can find across New Zealand. And they have high economic and cultural values, and quite known for the honey production, essential oil, or timber. They are Mānuka and Kānuka early successional plants, relatively short-lived, and often you will find those shrublands presenting high level of fragmentation, like you can see on this photo, which are often adjacent to anthropogenic land uses, which are human disturbed land uses, such here on this photo is pasture. So for the whole project, I mostly worked with vegetation surveys that are hosted by the National Vegetation Survey Data Bank. And I only used permanent plots that were under the land use and carbon analysis system. We call it the Lucas plots, which are 20 by 20 meters permanent plots spread across New Zealand on an 8 by 8 kilometer grid. At the time, we used the latest survey that has been fully completed and entered in the NVS data bank, which was the survey from 2009 and 2014. So those vegetation surveys provide lots of information about each individual species present at the plots, which can be either native or non-native, and also their location and their cover across multiple tiers. For this piece of research, we are more interested into all the species present in the canopy layer, so above 5 meters high, and all the species that are found at the ground level, so less than 30 centimeters high. So with those information, we can calculate proxies for competitive interactions, such as species richness, which is the number of species that you can find at the plot, or their cumulative cover, so how much space do they occupy within that plot. So the postdoctoral project was divided in two sections, two aspects. So the first one was focusing on identifying the drivers of wood invasions, so how native species, landscape features, and climate influence wood invasions in Kānuka Shrubland, whereas the second part was more about trying to understand whether Kānuka Shrublands are indeed the most invaded woody ecosystems in New Zealand. So for that, we compared that level of invasion with other types of native forests, with a special interest in distinguishing between weeds invasion stages and growth form. So let's start by the first part of that postdoc project. So the main goal can be divided into several questions. The first one was to focusing on native vegetation structure, so the role of native species that are present either at the canopy layer or on the ground level, and into preventing weed invasions. The second one, we were wondering whether greater presence of anthropogenic land uses adjacent to Kānuka Shrublands can favor weed invasions. Then we also wondered whether the proximity to road or rivers that are known to be dispersal corridors, potential dispersal corridors, increase the level of weed invasions. And finally, more regarding to the climate, so whether we could find more non-native species present in warmer and drier areas, as it has been found in other research. And of course, here we'll be using proxies for weed invasions, two different ones. One is about non-native species richness, so how many non-native species or weed species you can find in the site, and what's their ground cover, so how much space do they use, do they utilize in that plot, which can be a proxy for also the potential impact at the site. To get information on the landscape features and the climate variables, I first extracted information from the land cover database, the version 5, with calculating the proportion of anthropogenic land cover, which can be grasslands or exotic forest like pine, within a 1 kilometer radius, and also the distance to nearest road and river. So those are all proxies for propagular pressure, so disturbance and different level of fragmentation. We also consider climate and mostly mean annual temperatures and mean annual rainfall. So let's talk about the results. So when we focus on the role of species present in the canopy, so how many tree species are present and do they limit weed invasion, we found that actually they do play that role that so I'm just going to stop here to just explain how to read the graph. If the black line that is going down is showing you the relationship between non-native ground richness and native canopy richness on the left-hand side, and the shade part is the confidence interval. If you have stars, that means that relationship is significant, so there is an effect. So here, when you look at both of the graphs, the one about the relationship about ground richness and non-native ground cover on the right-hand side, these curves all go down, which means that there is a negative relationship, confirming that native trees present in the canopy do limit weed invasions, both in terms of numbers at the site and the space they occupied at the site. This can be explained by the competition for resources such as light, and we know that many of the non-native weed species present in New Zealand actually have low shade tolerance. Then what about the native species present at the ground level? Are they playing any role into the resistance against weed invasions? So what we found is we do have a positive relationship between non-native ground richness and non-native native richness, suggesting that the more natives are present in the plot, the more non-natives you can find, which could suggest that there is a relationship between the two, and native might help non-native species to establish. However, when you look at the mean ground cover of non-native, this relationship is non-significant. So it's more likely that they both respond to similar external factors that we are not considering in this analysis, rather than influencing each other. When focusing on anthropogenic land cover, we found that it plays a quite a major role in weeds establishment success, and that we have an increase in numbers of non-natives and an increase in their cover as you get more anthropogenic land cover surrounding your plots. And this can be explained by the fact that this is the dominant New Zealand landscape. And they are often associated with high level of fragmentation, which increase the likelihood of weed species getting into the fragment of the remnant of the forest. And these are often dominated by non-native species. They are also associated with high level of disturbances that can also create openings for a non-native species to get established. Then what about road and rivers and climate? And so all of those factors were quite important, but only for non-native ground richness. So the closer the site was to the road or the river, the more non-native species you would find. And actually, temperature had less of an impact on the number of weeds compared to rainfall. So we definitely find more non-native species in the drier part of New Zealand. So in summary, for this first part of the research, we were able to show that native tree species do promote resistance against most of the weed species. However, greater adjacent anthropogenic land cover can favor invasions as they provide seed source to the nearby shrubland. Climate and distance to nearest road and rivers are also important, but more in the earlier stage of invasion. So they more determine how many species will get into your site, but less how much space they will occupy, like how successful they will be at invading the site. So now that we know a bit more about the drivers, we will focus on trying to understand whether Mānuka Kānuka Shrublands are more invaded by weeds than other native forests. So again, we can break it down into several questions. So the first one was, how does the level of weed invasion vary across the different forest ecosystems? And whether those trends vary depending on the invasion stages of the species. So are invasive species showing similar trends as when compared to naturalized species? And can we find similar patterns with when we divide the weed species by growth form? So are woody non-native species more likely to invade forest ecosystem than herbaceous species? And also we will try to see if native trees still play an important role in resistance against weeds when we divide them by different invasion stages or growth form. Again, this research was focused on non-native species richness and their ground cover. So we have the earlier stage, like how many species can get into that site and how much space they might occupied or what's the level of impact. So for that, we pulled more permanent plots from the Lucas data, and we divided them by broad forest type categories based on the work done by Susan Weiser and her collaborators. That first started in 2011, and this forest grouping are still being improved over time. So here we have 5 categories. We have the beech broadleaf forest, beech broadleaf podocarp forest, beech forest, and broadleaf podocarp forest. And of course, our main point of interest, Mānuka Kānuka Shrublands. So for this presentation, I will mostly focus on the trends that the patterns that we can observe for Mānuka Kānuka Shrubland. We also divided weed species by invasion stages, like I've mentioned before. So naturalized species are species that have arrived in New Zealand and they are maintaining their population in the wild. Environmental weeds are weed species that are known to to be of special interest, and that has been established. This is a list made by DOC, the Department of Conservation, and these are weeds that are widespread or locally abundant, and that are known to have an impact on local biodiversity and the ecosystems. I also divided the weeds by growth form, so whether they were woody or herbaceous species. So, for example, here on the left-hand side, we have Transescantia familiensis, which is a quite well-known environmental weed that creates mats in the understory of the forest and prevent forest regeneration. And this weed, environmental weed, also falls into the category of herbaceous species. We also have plum trees, for instance, that is naturalized and a woody species. However, this was with the previous version, the previous list of environmental weeds from 2008, and this species is no longer considered as just a naturalized species. It's actually an environmental weeds, but in my research, it is considered as naturalized species because it's a bit older. So, is Kānuka Shrublands more invaded than any of the other forest types? And the answer is actually yes, it is. As you can see on the left side, we have the mean non-native ground cover, and Kānuka Shrublands are sitting way above the other forest types in terms of the mean cover, which is around 35%. On the right-hand side on the map, it's the circles vary, the size of the circles vary by the number of weed species that you can find across the different plots, and you can see that the blue circle, that is Kānuka Shrublands, are quite significantly bigger than for the other forest types. Also, however, we can notice that next in the line is broadleaf podocarp forest. So when we divide invasive weed species, we can find different patterns between environmental weeds that are in black and naturalized that are in blue-green. And so in terms of non-native richness, there are way more naturalized species present in Kānuka Shrublands compared to environmental weeds. This is to be expected as the environmental weeds are a subset of the naturalized species. So by default, you have less species in that group. However, when you look at the non-native cover, you have a shift with environmental weed being way higher in terms of mean cover compared to naturalized species. And this pattern is found across all the forest types. And I would just want you to just notice that for broadleaf podocarp forest, the mean non-native cover of environmental is quite significantly higher compared to any of the other forest types. So again, this is showing that broadleaf podocarp forests can be quite susceptible to in wind invasion once they get there. Then what about the role of native canopy cover? Unfortunately, what we saw is indeed they help providing resistance against weeds invasions, but this is mostly true for herbaceous weeds. So what we can see here on those two graphs is that we have a non-significant relationship between the non-native cover of woody weeds and the native canopy cover, whereas for herbaceous weeds, it does go down. So the greater native cover, the lower cover the herbaceous weeds will have at your site. So in summary, for this project, we showed that Kānuka shrublands are one of the most invaded shrublands woody ecosystem in New Zealand, with next in line early successional forests like broadleaf podocarp forest, and both show higher level of invasion compared to all the other forest types. Despite a low richness or a low number, environmental weeds show much higher cover, which means that, yeah, they do belong to that classification. And although native trees promote resistance against herbaceous weeds, this is not necessarily the case for woody weeds, which are quite often present as considered as environmental weeds. So if we do a general conclusion of the two pieces of work, we showed that land uses that are disturbed and often dominated by weeds like anthropogenic land cover do favor invasions adjacent native shrublands. Mānuka Kānuka shrublands are quite highly fragmented, and if they have low native richness, they are more likely to be invaded by weeds. And these Mānuka Kānuka shrublands are the most vulnerable to invasions. However, woody weeds are actually probably the biggest threat to native forest and shrubland due to their capacity to, once being present, sustain themselves in the understory and then spread within the site. So both pieces of work have been published and are on open access journals. So if you scan those two QR codes, you will be led to the publication to go a little bit further. And this presentation will stay on the website, so you'll have access much later on. And link will be also added to the website by Bioprotection Aotearoa. I'll just finish with one little note that I'm part of a bigger team that is led by a distinguished professor, Philip Hulme. And while I was doing my postdoc, we have another PhD student, Frederica Spinoza, that has been doing some work in completing some of what I've been studying. So I was mostly focused on the national scale, so whereas she's more focused at the local scale. So what drivers matters at the forest fragment, and also particularly Kānuka shrublands. We are also now moving into a new piece of research that I'm co-leading with distinguished Professor Philip Hulme, with 3 new PhD students that just freshly started and are currently working on their research proposal. And they all 3 are about critical pathways of weeds. So how weeds spread across the landscape. Vector will be focused on the role of the road networks and the landscape attributes in the spread distribution of weeds. Blair will be more focusing on riparian corridors, and Niyi will focus on woody weeds spread by birds. So keep an eye on the Bioprotection Aotearoa website. There will be a lot more information on weeds in the future. Thank you very much for your attention, and yeah, happy to take any questions. And I'll stop sharing.
Oh, Te Paki. That's fantastic presentation, Laureline. And just a shout out to you and Phil and the team there too, the wider mahi, but great mahi today. Any he pātai tā koutou, any questions, please put into the chat for Laureline, and I'll read them out. Also, a couple of shout outs. I'd love to shout out to the National Vegetation Survey database, the NIVS, also the New Zealand Land Use Carbon Analysis System, Lucas. Just a shout out to Manaaki Whenua, Landcare researchers. Amazing database and longitudinal knowledge that those 2 systems have been providing Aotearoa research community for decades now. So that was just a little shout out to you for your presentation as well. But back to the weeds. What were the most common weeds in the Mānuka Kānuka shrubland, by the way? I mean, I shouldn't ask really, should I? It's probably Pandora's box, but what were the common ones?
So depending on whether you focus on herbaceous or woody, you have different list of weed species. So actually I can share again, because I did prepare some slides just in case we have some questions. And so I'm working at the national scale level. So some of those weeds might not be common for most of you, so I'll just go quickly. So in that piece of research, we have mostly herbaceous species that are the most frequent, but not necessarily occupying most of the cover of those places. But we do have some of environmental weeds that we know quite well, like cocksfoot, foxglove, or even gorse at the moment at the bottom that are have been present. And when you focus on only woody weeds, which are the one that we are more concerned about here, the most common one was gorse, blackberry, and broom, actually, in Kānuka Shrublands. But a few of them actually made it also to other forest types. And what is our take-home message here is to say that native forests are, even if they are more resistant to weeds, there are always one that will manage to get in there and can potentially have some impact. So yeah, it's more or less what's the plant community that have picked up. And of course, all that information is in the supplementary material normally of our publications.
No, thank you for that. I was expecting a potpourri of triffids, but you've confirmed it. We'll roll into the questions, keep them running. Alan, kia ora. What is it about environmental weeds rather than naturalised that seem to make them more vigorous, do you think?
That's a really good question. So among all the non-myrtle weeds, we have different weeds. So it's both like herbaceous and woody, but I think some of them may have traits that are more like shade tolerance, for instance. That's really one that is determinant for successful invasions of forest system. So if you get a woody weed that is persistent and has at least like a minimum level of shade tolerance, it can wait until there is a disturbance in the canopy and will overtake that space because they can grow much faster than native species.
Kia ora, Edward Landreth. Do you have any suggestions on how to promote resistance to woody weeds in a forest landscape? Gosh, that's a good question. Or is it just a matter of reducing exposure from weeds in the surrounding landscape? So
Oh, that's a really good comment and question. So I think when we think about Mānuka shrublands, it's definitely about making sure you maintain some canopy cover to just tackle most of the weeds. Unfortunately, if you have shade tolerant species, you might need to get into the forest patch and do actual weeding to tackle those weeds. But I think that's the priority here would be to prevent most of the weed invasions, to maintain that canopy, as Mānuka are quite short-lived. Sometimes they will die over time, and if there is no natives in the understory, they might those gaps can be filled by weeds pretty much.
Yes, good. Those woody weed invasions are really scary that we were seeing around Aotearoa. So a question from Angus. Kia ora. Which weeds have the greatest impact on native regeneration?
Very interesting. I guess we can rely on the environmental weed list provided by DOC. So species like mat-forming species like Transescantia are some of the ones that we know will prevent seedlings to germinate, for instance. I would say, or other species that are known to change the soil properties potentially as well, that might shift the regeneration of the forest towards something that might be more easily invaded. So we know some studies have shown that gorse tend to do that, for instance, in some cases. So yeah, it's quite a long list of plant species. So I think what we showed is the list of environmental weeds is actually a pretty good one to capture those species of interest, or the one that we need to be the most worried about.
I guess related to that also is what are your thoughts around the why Kānuka Shrublands are invaded? You know, you were comparing it to, say, the Potocarp, the open Potocarp beach, broadleaf sort of systems, and obviously the Mānuka shrubland seems to be, and we've heard other presentations previously, it's highly degraded and invaded, isn't it? And weeds are the forefront of this invasion. So what do you think is driving this or influencing this being so susceptible?
Oh, thanks. So like we've said, that Kānuka shrublands, well, especially like when we think about Kānuka more in the South Island, for instance, they are present in highly fragmented landscapes. So instead of having a continuous forest, you have lots of little pockets that share edges with often open grasslands or other disturbed lands that can be source of weeds. And whereas other forest types are more often found in national parks, so it's less disturbed for continuous forests, so they are less likely to share boundaries where sources of weeds. So that's one way to explain why Kānuka shrubland can be more invaded. And what another aspect that is quite interesting as well is that it's a little bit about like the story about, is it the egg or the chicken that comes first? Kānuka shrublands are actually, well, Kānuka plant species are are pioneer species. So they all colonize and germinate much better in like bare ground. So, and they are often the first ones to grow and arrive when land is being retired. So you have also some legacy of land management where maybe actually some of those sites are highly invaded because the seed bank was already dominated by weeds. But so that's for future research, of course. It would be very interesting to take into account that legacy of land management.
And I mean, a shout out to one of the BA PhD subjects, Diana Borst, Margaret and Angela's work around the whole, I guess, proximity to gardens and, well, you know, urban scapes where there's, as you said, that horrific list of potentially weedy, naturalizing garden. You know, there's that propagular pressure and then the birds coming over as well. So that sort of and then the seed bank as well. It just seems to be, you'd almost give up, and I'm not suggesting giving up, but you know, there's so much pathways to invasion. It's almost overwhelming, isn't it? To the point I can't speak.
It's true that it's really challenging, and especially when we know that half of vascular plant species in New Zealand are actually weeds. And this is where the work of our current PhDs comes in, where they are trying to identify for some like key species that we need to focus on, and and the last cohort of PhDs will be looking at how do they spread into the landscape, what attributes do they have that makes them successful into using those road networks or the gardens, the origin, and also so we can actually get a better sense on where we can do surveillance, for instance, to detect those early incursions, because usually it's in the earlier stages more manageable than once the plant is established and spread everywhere and the seed bank is already built up, and it's going to take years and years to tackle those weeds.
Yes, it's a long-term planning and a sustained long-term management, isn't it? That's required. But obviously, the research you and the team are doing are fundamentally going to be helping understand how we get to that space and prioritize it. Now, I could speak to you about for weeds for hours because it's a lovely pet project of mine. However, I should just check if there's any more any more questions, folks. Just put them in the chat. I don't think there's any so far, but also part of the system is the native ecosystem that you're talking about that is being invaded, and some of your mahi or your previous research and current research that's even doing, looking at the potential responses of some of these native species themselves and their response to the invasion. Is that a factor you think that also, I mean, I know you've touched on it already with the question about why the Kānuka is so invaded, but like there's multiple responses by the native ecosystem as well. Is that something you think you're on the track of already in tranche one, but what else could we learn from that?
Oh, so some of the work actually that I haven't mentioned for the first part when we were focusing on invasions of Mānuka Kānuka Shrubland, often we focused on the weeds, and this time we also wanted to keep an eye on what native species were doing. And what we found was that they actually do not. So when we take the same drivers of weeds invasions, we were wondering whether native species would respond to some of them in a similar way. And we found that is not the case. So for example, when you have a lot of anthropogenic land cover surrounding your patch of Mānuka Kānuka, the number of native species is dropping, and also their cover. So that means that anthropogenic land cover directly influenced with the invasion through propagal pressure, disturbance, but also indirectly by affecting native species. So some of them could be that by having lots of fragments, they are quite isolated from each other. So you have less native thistles to regenerate the forest from the understory. So that was quite interesting. And the same with like looking at climate, for instance, we saw that native species were mostly driven in terms of like their numbers and their cover driven by temperature, and didn't care too much about rainfall. So they do different things. And the same, like we compare the native species at the ground level and compared to non-natives, because we've been focusing on that level in terms of invasions as well. And so canopy trees do favor richness also in the ground level, which is quite positive, and also increase their cover. So differently, that really shows that native trees in the canopy not only provide some resistance by competing for lights, for instance, but also help the regeneration of the native species at the ground level. So there is direct and indirect influence.
No, it's very interesting what's happening. Kia ora, Alan, lucky last. I'll let you off the hook after this one, Laureline.
Sounds good.
Kia ora, thank you. Alan asks, how can we use your research to finesse our weed responses, focus near roads, away from roads, or does it just genuinely depend on the ecosystem?
So that's I would say a little bit of both. Definitely, especially if your roads are crossing different land uses. So you go from an open grassland, for instance, straight into a native forest. I think that's where some of our PhD will tackle more into more details, but there might be ways of doing some surveillance around roads and tracks, mostly because they can be corridors for weed spread. And also, like I said, it's based on the forest system as well. So some seems from our research, we found that some are more vulnerable than others to weed invasions. So through definitely prioritizing shrublands and early succession forests like broadleaf podocarp forests that are also quite often a legacy of disturbance or closer to seed source of weeds would be quite a good idea, I think. But yeah, we will try to refine that a little bit better with the work from the PhDs. So keep an eye out on what's bioprotection website and our future communication.
No, kia ora for that, Laureline. Before we came on this, I described to you coming down from Aotearoa to Te Puke today, and I had the joyous company of Japanese honeysuckle from the start of my journey to the finish of it. And I went through pastoral pastures, open pasture. I went through what was more a wetland ecosystem, went through Pohutukawa forest, Rako on the coastside cliffs. I kept going, there's orchards. Every system, Japanese honeysuckle was there with me. I couldn't believe it. So I think you're very right about some of these roadways and the management responses for it, because there's the multiple ecosystems along that state highway too, and Japanese honeysuckle. It was quite, because it's flowering. But anyway, I'm crocheting, as they say. I'm going off topic. So I just again would like to, thank you again for an amazing presentation. Kia ora, thank you for that. And also just answering all the questions and the partai, and I'm wishing you well for the rest of the research and what the team's doing. So kia ora. And as you said, and also Laureline's, as she's mentioned several times, there's links in the Bioprotection Aotearoa socials, but in the chat there, thank you, Fiona, she's been putting in direct links to your papers and your research. And so, as I said, there's a lot of it ongoing. So, as you've said, Laureline, please keep in touch around everybody with the progress that you're doing. So well done, and kia ora.
Thank you, kia ora. Thank you everyone for attending this presentation.
Before we leave, I'd just like to also thank Laureline again for joining an esteemed rōpū of amazing researchers for the Rangahau Rising 2025, acknowledging yourself and doctors John Ramana, Alexa Byers, Hanarea Eho Taumanu, and Sarah Inwood. Now, all of those, and yourself now, lovely gallery of the presentations that you've all, that Hanarea, Laureline, John, Alexa, and Sarah have given over the course of the year. They're all encapsulated, they're all recorded there for people to go and familiarise yourself with them, or actually, if you've not seen them, the topics are really exciting. Microbial indicators of forest health and environmental change, drivers of soil carbon resilience across agro-ecosystems, Māori Taiwaka microbiome and the impacts on that, myrtle rust, and rethinking biocontrol in the genomics era. Now joining non-native plant invasion in Aotearoa, insights from the Mānuka Kānuka Shrublands. So that is, I just wanted to thank you all for those presentations, and Laureline ending the years, and also Nau mai haramai, welcoming you all again to the last one. Thank you all for attending. So kia ora to those who've joined. Before I close with a closing karakia, I also want to do, we are continuing the webinar series into 2026 with Dr. Nils Burkholz from the University of Otago. The link there in the chat, thanks Fiona. Again, he's going to be looking at the bacterial defense systems and mobile genetic elements. So stay up to date. If you've registered for this one, you'll get keep an eye out for that. That's going to be in Wednesday, the 18th of March. So kia ora, Nils. We'll be looking forward to you kicking off 2026. And lastly, I just want to also thank the mahi of Fiona, Soha, Anna, and the team at Bioprotection Aotearoa for making these what they are as well. So, you know, helping produce and present these. So your help has been most graciously accepted, and wishing you, thanking you for your mahi. So I'll close with a karakia whakamutuna for today's hui. Ka wihi atu tātou I raro I te rangamari e te hare koa me te manawa nui haumie huie. And also, I guess I have to, just one last thing, have to say ngā mihi mō te kirehemete, or ngā mihi o te tauhou ki koutou katoa, wishing you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year for 2026. I'm very sorry to do that, but since those horrible Italian panafortes, those big high breads with raisins in them are cluttering the supermarket aisles, I thought it would be very rude not to wish you all a fantastic Christmas with you and your whānau and your whananga, and have a great holiday break for you all. So I just thought I'd say that. So kia ora everyone, and take care. See you on the other side. Ka kite anō.